National Arts has been made possible by Low Real Estate Group at Path Realty, proudly serving the Shepherdstown community in West Virginia for nearly a half century, providing commercial, leasing, rental, marketing, and consulting. Hi, I'm Mike Baker, and welcome to National Arts. This Emmy-winning television series features some of the finest visual and performing artists in the tri-state area. Season 2 promises to be equally rewarding as we feature highlights from chamber music festivals, classical artists, poets, playwrights, cartoonists, stained glass window artisans, even a Broadway actor. So without further ado, let's get started.
This is the perfect shot for demonstrating where Harper's Ferry is located in the middle of the Potomac River and the mountains here in West Virginia.
Teresa Hughes pursued a college degree in art, which put her in good stead when it came to artistic expression and what makes a good photograph. Her entree into the realm of photography was quite by accident. She joined a photography club while working at the National Institute of Standards and Technology and found her artistic niche. 2 Nikon camera upgrades later, she reached regional recognition. She won the first place ribbon from the Washington Gardener magazine with a photo of a pumpkin display. From there, her career began to blossom. Perhaps most notable was her photography blog for the Henlopen State Park at the height of the COVID outbreak. The photographs gave thousands a glimpse of what was waiting for them when the pandemic lessened and everyone could once again enjoy nature. Now she has a national website that prints, frames, and ships her work all over the world.
I took 3 classes in college back when you developed your own film in a darkroom, and I loved that whole process of putting it in the chemicals and brushing the paper and watching the image come up. It was magical, and I don't think I ever lost that fascination for capturing a photo and film. But when I started taking photography again 12 years ago, everything was different. It was digital, and I had to relearn everything, basically start over from scratch, other than art and composition, which I loved, and I always enjoyed art anyway. But I had to learn how to, transfer images to a computer, and then I had to learn Photoshop because sometimes my images were slanted. Adjust my horizon line and get the dust spots off, and it was a challenge.
But you have the roots in dark
Yes.
rooms, and that gives you a unique perspective when it comes to photography, do you think?
A little bit, yeah. There's an appreciation for the history of things.
Mm-hmm.
And as I get older, I'm appreciating history much more than when I was a younger 20-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Maybe when you take a photograph now, at least from your darkroom experience and those initial photographs, you were always aware of the shadows because you knew that they were going to be uppermost in your mind when you developed that photograph or when you submerged it in the chemicals. Now maybe you see things and see shadows differently, or maybe the perception is different by virtue of that early learning.
It's possible,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, you may not be aware, but everybody that I've talked to that has gone through both modes has said, yeah, that was invaluable. It just gives me somehow a sense of photography that I would have never had if I'd just come to it as a digital experience. So you learned Photoshop, you joined this club, you took the classes, and you did all the homework. Those first digital photographs with that first Nikon, what was that like?
That was fun. I think the biggest revelation for me is that I could take as many images as I wanted on the disc, and I didn't have to worry about having 36 photos developed and the cost of each. I could actually just delete them and throw them away. So I took hundreds and hundreds of photos to get maybe 10 good ones each time I went out. And as I went along, I got better. But it took a real patience to see what I wanted through the lens of the camera, as opposed to, you know, worrying about taking those 12 images or 24 images on a roll of film. So that was exciting, to be able to take as many as I wanted and not have to worry about the cost. I think sometimes it just comes to you. You can lose track of time when you're outside. The beauty of photography is it makes you look for what's beautiful around you. You know, you're always searching for that perfect light or the perfect composition or the unique image. And sometimes when you look through the lens, you just know, this is it. This is the one that I've been looking for today. And you take it and you get home and you're pleased. But basically, I lose track of time if I'm really into what I'm doing. And the wonderful part of it is being outdoors again. I love being outdoors, especially now. That tree is not fully turned in color. If I remember from my previous trips up here, that one's a really red maple tree, or I'm not even sure. I don't know my trees. But it's beautiful in the fall. And it's nice to get the layers in the photograph without having to climb a ladder or anything. This shot is interesting to me because of the textures. Because the colors are so similar, the textures jump out at me, and the repetitions in the patterns. The slate construction of the pillars below the lanterns, the railings on the balcony, the stone construction of the house, all have repetition in them. The stone wall, as you come up the walkway here, it all has pattern and repetition and texture. It would be a really good monochrome photo. This is a wonderful shot because of the late afternoon shadows, and you can do a lot with the leading lines here. Take advantage of the corners of your photograph and have these shadows go directly into the corner so that they lead you up when you take the photograph. And include the branches over the ruins to be like a natural frame. This is going to be awesome. It really is. You can tell sometimes when you look at a subject that it's going to be an awesome photograph. The way the shadows are displaying inside the ruins are really interesting too, because they have natural curves in there and they highlight the texture. It's just beautiful. I'm looking at Jefferson Rock, which I've never seen before, and it's atop this splendid view on a ravine. A little nerve-wracking to be so close to the edge, but I'm sure it was much more breathtaking without the sound of the traffic rolling by and the lawnmowers at one time when Jefferson first stopped here. The paths and the wildflowers, even in September, are beautiful in the mountains. This is a shot that you only see if you turn around and look at what's behind you. But I turned around once we got out to Jefferson Rock, and I could see the spire on St. Peter's and also the bridge that cuts across the Potomac River in Harper's Ferry, and it's beautiful between the rocks. I think in a vertical position would give me a better depth of field because I can get the flowers in front and the steeple behind. And it's just gorgeous. The light on the steeple really makes it stand out this afternoon. This is the perfect shot for demonstrating where Harper's Ferry is located, in the middle of the Potomac River and the mountains here in West Virginia. You can see the different inclines, you can see the river, the bridge, and the rocks nearby. It's gorgeous. Thank you.
Now, how did you come to win this contest, and then somehow somebody took notice of your work and you submitted it, and now you are a photographer, a volunteer photographer of, I guess, a dozen or so that are very prestigious. Tell me about that.
Well, I like gardens. I've visited a lot of public gardens, and I took some pictures of plants, and I found a contest through the Washington Gardener magazine, and I entered a few photos, and I was really pleased when I won my first, award, and it gave me a little confidence. Besides the club competitions that we had, I was able to actually be recognized in a bigger, venue, and they displayed our work, so I was pretty excited, and we decided we may try purchasing a house in Delaware to retire there in the future. So we had recently purchased a house in Delaware, and I heard an ad for the Delaware State Parks that they were going to try a volunteer photography group for their programs in the next year, and I thought, this is tailor-made for me. I love going to parks and gardens. I'm interested in conservation and ecology, and I would love to highlight their programs through photographs, so I applied. They asked me for samples of my work, and I was interviewed, and I was thrilled to be selected. And then, of course, COVID hit, and some of those programs were canceled. So I've done what I could in the past year, and it's gotten better, but these were things I was going to do anyway, and so it's a win-win for me, and hopefully I've highlighted some of the value of what the parks offer, especially now.
Experiencing Cape Henlopen State Park from a photographer's perspective, by Teresa Hughes. I first discovered Cape Henlopen as I became interested in the history of the World War II observation towers that I kept seeing along Route 1 on the coast between the beaches in Delaware. My father and I had been discussing World War II, and he amazed me with the facts that he remembered. He was a young preteen who had avidly read the newspaper as he had an older cousin who had been called to serve in the war. I started reading about Delaware's involvement in World War II and was surprised to discover a German U-boat had surrendered at Fort Miles. When I also learned that Cape Henlopen had an observation tower that you could actually climb, I knew I had to visit. The view from there is amazing. You can see up to 14.5 miles away. Visiting the tower in Fort Miles made history come alive for me. Climbing the observation tower was also inspired by my love of climbing lighthouses. I was surprised to discover that the park has not only one, but two lighthouses. The East End Breakwater Lighthouse, which is red, and the Harbor of Refuge Lighthouse, which is white. Although you cannot climb these lighthouses, they are very photogenic. The beauty of the lighthouses prompted my first repeat visits to Cape Henlopen. When my photography expanded to include birds, I found that Gordon's Pond and the bike trail along the marsh were perfect locations to observe birds each season. I photographed a variety of shorebirds in the summer, migrating sparrows in the fall, eagles and herons during the winter months, and egrets returning to their nest in the spring. One spring I discovered an owl had taken up temporary residence in an osprey nest. Nature lovers will find plenty of opportunities for photography when visiting Cape Henlopen. The horseshoe crabs and ghost crabs are on every beach. I was once greeted by a fox at the toll booth. On a sunrise visit, a very tame, inquisitive young deer walked right up to greet me as I walked the beach path past the dunes. That was magical. Each time I visit Cape Henlopen State Park, I set out to get a little exercise and have some fun. I've climbed the tower to look down and see a marriage proposal spelled out in the pine cones below. I've stopped in wonder with other hikers to watch a flock of migrating birds repeat their descent and rise off of the buried trees near the bike path. I've dodged swimming crabs while wading through the bay. I've walked the coastline chasing cresting dolphins just offshore. Once I was surprised to see billowing sails on a tall ship, the Kalmar Nickel, a replica of a 1638 Swedish ship sailing by Cape Henlopen. And on one summer sunrise visit, I was walking near the towers on the beach when I heard the unexpected sound of a bagpipe playing. Every visit is unique.
Artist Joe Mayer was one of the most prolific and popular watercolor artists on the East Coast. Joe graduated from the prestigious College of William and Mary in Commercial Art. He received his MFA from Catholic University, where he became fascinated with watercolor and began studying with Skip Lawrence and Edgar Whitney. His exemplary scholastic work led to the chairmanship of the Fine Arts Department at a local university. In 1980, Joe began teaching private classes in watercolor, which for the next 30 years allowed him to teach workshops across the United States and in Europe as well. His continued curiosity with composition led him to painting in oils and acrylics as he moved increasingly towards non-objective painting, which he came to refer to as music without lyrics. Regretfully for the art world and for all who knew him, Joe passed away on January 28, 2020. Over 100 local residents appeared at a retrospective of his work and to say a final goodbye to an artist who'd inspired so many.
I can't speak in depth about Joe's process. I think probably because I only saw him in action at a few demonstrations of his watercolor technique in workshops. And frankly, I prefer it to be a mystery. I prefer to think, my reaction to Joe's work is, how the hell does he do this? How can he work in so many different genres, in so many different media, and always at an excellent level? And one of his least favorite questions and most favorite answers was this: when somebody would ask him how long it took to paint one of his paintings, and normally they would ask this of his watercolors, and normally it was after seeing him at one of his workshops produce in the space of 15 or 20 minutes a beautiful watercolor painting. His standard response was always whatever age he was. So when he was 75, he said 75 years. And then later at 85 years is how long it took me to produce this. Again, a little bit of a sarcastic response, but that was true. I mean, he, you know, this work, his late landscape work here in acrylics was a culmination of a lifetime. He was in his 89th year when he passed away, and that's a hell of a lot of painting. That's a hell of a lot of work, and so that was one of the. That comment always stuck with me, and it would generally silence those kinds of inquiries. I attended some workshops here in town, which were really, that Joe would hold periodically, that were really just kind of presentations. And while he was lecturing, he'd be creating a new painting, of course, based on memory. He didn't really, he almost always worked from memory. He didn't work plein air, you know. He wasn't out there with this easel at the crossroads of the railroad track. And during the lecture, he'd compose a beautiful watercolor painting. And at the end, you know, everybody would clap, and he would pick somebody out of the audience, usually a nice-looking woman, and give her the piece, which, you know, he just handed out to him. But it was always different, and but always just beautiful. And the fact that he could sit there and lecture and paint at the drop of a hat was a real eye opener for me. I mean, he taught me the many ways of seeing. I think that his phases or his periods, as far as subject matter, related more to where he was geographically at the time. So early on, the watercolors were in the DC area. He spent some time in Maine at Monhegan Island, which is known, of course, as an artist colony. And he's got so there were a whole series of seacoast paintings. And then when he moved back here, again, most of the subject matter was related to local farms and scenes. And when he sort of got fed up a little bit with Shepherdstown, he moved to the Eastern Shore. And so there's a whole period of Eastern Shore. He lived in Easton. He had a studio gallery there. And so the subject matter shifted there. and he started to work in mixed media. And then he really got into mixed media when he moved out to Santa Fe. He and Ann moved out to Santa Fe, lived there for several years before returning back to Shepherdstown just a few years ago. And he loved talking mostly about his non-objective work, his abstracts, in that, again, he had a literal interpretation of the word abstract, taking something from something else and making something else. And for example, we'd be looking at this landscape series here, and he talked about his choice of creating this little rectangle of gold paint as being either a figure or a piece of architecture on a landscape. So you've got the horizon. This is the thin blue line. So you've got a horizon going through the landscape, and then this focal point, which is geometric against everything else, and as a way of just drawing your eye into the work. And it's from his second Shepherdstown period, so it was probably painted in his 80s. And some people might look at this painting and say, oh, that's a Joe Mayer abstract. He didn't really like the term abstract. He preferred the term non-objective painting because of the connotation in some people's minds of abstract art as being inaccessible, I don't get it, what's the point, etc. But for Joe, this was just another way of painting a landscape. This is as much a landscape as some of his more representational work early on. Okay, this painting is one of the last remaining oil paintings that I've seen of Joe's. And it's cryptically titled, as he liked to do, The Queen of Black Dog Alley, for no particular reason. I'm not even sure there is a Black Dog Alley anywhere. But look at the brilliance of that tree, that autumn tree, and against that sky and in that landscape, and compare it to what we saw before in the brilliant oranges and reds of the other landscape. Again, just a different kind of landscape painting for Joe, and you're left questioning, where's the queen? Is the tree the queen? Probably. Looks like a big crown. But it was kind of his way of a tongue-in-cheek kind of nod to, I think, painting titles in a way. Yeah, whoever ends up with this painting is going to be very lucky to have it, because it's really one of his last remaining oil paintings. I love this painting because it's got a boat in it, and I love paintings with boats. But more importantly, it's a great example of his Eastern Shore water period. And yes, it's kind of an iconic sort of representational view, but at the same time, it has a quality of realism and immediacy. I mean, again, it's not a specific scene. He's not working from life, and he's not working from a photograph. So you realize, oh, this is just another example of his mastery of composition, the decisions of what objects to put where, and how to depict the receding background here, and then suddenly we're faced with this big edifice, architectural edifice, and with colors that complement the boat's colors. So again, yeah, great example from his water period of a really quite magnificent watercolor. And as I've always said, in 2018, Joe was our inspiration for opening a gallery here, because Shepherdstown at that time really had no art spaces, no gallery space in the historic town in downtown Shepherdstown. This is from a journal entry of his. I've been so lucky. I've known love and loneliness, joy and despair, success and failure, fame and rejection. I look at the sky now. I watch the woods come alive. I walk the streets and alleys of this little town. I remember so much. I am a ghost now. I am invisible. My voice is lost in the wind. And then in all caps, I want to be what I used to be. Young, strong, funny, adventurous, handsome, so alive with ideas, so alive with friendship, so alive with passion. I stand at home plate, bat on my shoulder, eyes focusing on the left field fence. But the opposing team has left the field. But oh, what a game it has been.
Thank you for joining us on National Arts. A great photographer has emerged, and an amazing artist has left us. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.